today is going to be a still. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'll probably do some sort of blocky deal. And I might do it with a little bit wider of some lines, some thicker, a little bit more playful, but I might go ahead and just sketch out some like general spacing of things. Let's see, is that all in frame? Let me zoom out. How many am I in 2? Okay, make sure that I have enough space. But make it a little bit more maybe playful. Just getting some figures happening, or just getting a general sort of placement of some things. The idea is to make it a little bit looser than I've been sort of caught up with more rigid grids recently. I want to get it a little bit looser. I might end up doing 2 of these just for the amount of time. Pav Bal Bahajai. I'm gonna say this terribly, like I say Sambor. Bani Pari. I've made a lot of dal. So my older sister is married to a guy who was born in India but grew up around the American South. His family's from like super central India. But he showed, when they visited at some point, they bought a stovetop pressure cooker, which I've gotten better at making basmati rice using that guy. I made some sort of kidney bean dish. He's made some, I don't know if I talked about it when you were watching, but there's I talked about my relationship with okra and that I like bindi masala. And then some people in the comments from India talked about some 3 Idiots, the movie, that has like some joke with it that has to do with like the price of bindi. I like bindi masala because it's like I had fried okra at different times growing up. Rajma. Okay, yeah. I think that's what he called it. Ciao again, Marco Ferri. I think that you said ciao earlier, and I thought I responded, but maybe I didn't. Is my mic on? My mic is on, definitely. I did not see that movie, but somebody made a reference to the movie, and I thought they were like actually trying to be like, here's the price of bindi, and I was like, that doesn't compute to me, and I started trying to work out what the I'll do this in Sharpie, work out what the translation would be, because it was both in rupees and in kilograms, and I was like, I don't have much of a reference point for that since I'm in the States, so it's all dollars and pounds. And then they're like, no, it's just a joke. I don't think I've seen too many Indian movies, if any, really. But at the movie theater close by to me at the mall, I go there, or not currently, but I used to go there pretty frequently. I'd go to like matinees and stuff, and there's always some Indian movie there because there's an Indian population around here. But I can't name any offhand other than people referencing 3 Idiots. think the last thing that I watched that uh, was a movie that was centered around Indian people in some capacity was a documentary about Indian Americans and how much they have dominated the national spelling bee in the United States. I don't know if that's as much of an awareness for people back in India, but like there's a lot of Indian American kids who've done very well in the American spelling bee. I think that's okay. Okay. Went on an Indian kick. Let's see how well I can either manage or not manage this. I'm going for thicker, maybe softer lines that are a little bit not childish, but a little bit more cartoonish, perhaps. Let me take down this side. I was gonna say, where should I watch them? I know there's a few that are on Netflix in the States, but also there's a bunch of Indian movies that are just on YouTube. And I've never taken the time to invest in watching them. Try to do that at some point. Do you have any recommendations other than Three Idiots? And you didn't even recommend that. That's just the one that I'm aware of offhand. Sky is Pink. What's it about? Hey, Andrew. You only said you were excited to find out about, or for her to text you about the Fiona stuff. Hola, Adrian. Okay. Sky is Pink. I also have never seen The Fault in Our Stars. When I think about that movie, I think about a bad joke I made. Someone was asking, or Isaac asks about drawing straight lines and suggestions with that. Best advice: use a straight edge or a ruler. That's the easiest way to go about that. The other thing is not trying to rely on smaller muscles. If you're trying to draw a straight line, it's a lot easier if you're using like your full arm. So like instead of trying to go like that, or to try and drag where you have a limited range of motion and you're having to compensate and change, it's easier to just like drag your full arm. Just getting familiar with things, as opposed to trying to, like, you're more likely to get accidental curves if you're only working small for larger spaces. Pulling tends to be easier than trying to push in a straight line, I find. But that's just sort of my personal thing. If you do need to draw a lot freehand using a reference, like physically, if you can push against something that is doing that, but larger muscles and bigger motions tend to help better with straight lines. That one wasn't the best. Then if you're bracing yourself on things is very helpful. Not trying to draw, like not holding on to anything, doesn't work as well if you're like trying to go that route. Bracing yourself and using a variety of things and just getting a better sense of control by using your full body as opposed to trying to just use your smaller muscles. That's a good way to, or a better way that I've found to get straighter lines. For these, it's not as necessary because I kind of like the shakiness of it all. Knowing your tool is very helpful, as well as whatever you're trying to draw onto. Practice is also a good thing to do for creating straight lines or anything like that. Having a clear perspective, being able to see what you're working on is helpful. Turning the paper so that whatever feels most comfortable. Don't try to draw straight lines that are in contrast of what your body's natural like positioning and movements are. I usually find it easier in general to drag than it is to push, but part of that's because I'm using a brush most of the time and I need to angle it down so that the bristles don't push up against stuff and then the bristles jitter or jump, and no matter how like perfect your movement is, it'll be affected by that. And regardless of what advice I give, I will go against that advice sometimes accidentally, just because it's not always what I do. I'm not perfect in my execution of things. Animation stuff in this sort of format, I first started doing more ink, like physical based animations when I was in college, which would have been about 8 years ago. And that was sort of personal exploration. Oh, sorry, I forgot to answer the person who asked about the ink. I got distracted. I'm using Sumi ink, S-U-M-I ink, and the brand that I'm using is Yasutomo. It's a Japanese ink. It's available in most art stores. You can buy it online. Depending on where you are, you might have a different availability of it, but it's usually in like a calligraphy or ink section of an art supply store. It's less likely to be at a place like Michael's, but it might be. Like craft supplies, it's a little less likely to be there. So don't hold out if you're trying to find it in person and all you have in your area is a larger, broader store. But Sumi ink is relatively common. I have had sometimes when I go to a store and it's not there, but usually it's at spots. Sumi, Sumi. Uh, Usually it's either in a green bottle or has this red top. This is a like medium size. I think this one's like $12, but I've been working with it for a while. Um, I've also tried using Speedball ink. Speedball. Hello, Bajcik. Um, there's what's it? India ink, which it would probably depend on the brand as to what's good or bad. I'm not the biggest fan of the Speedball India ink. It's cheaper, but it gums up and it's not quite as black. It doesn't function quite as well for me, but it might work better for you. Depends on application. It's not bad, it's just not my preferred ink. Van Sajal asked, how do I understand that I wanted to be an animation designer? I had done animation in some capacity, and it was always a very rewarding thing to see something come to life in a very literal fashion that I was working on. But I found that I wasn't the biggest fan of the idea that I'd be working with a large group of people. For most animation jobs, you're part of a much larger team, and it's a collective effort, which isn't bad. It just wasn't what I was necessarily personally interested in. And so I focused on graphic design. That was my major in college, and I enjoyed it, but I got tired of the repetition of elements of it, which sounds weird when I'm doing what I'm doing, but or more of like updating things or revisiting projects wasn't my favorite, and that someone was telling me what was good and bad, which they weren't wrong, but I didn't like it. So I was at that time working or doing a lot of stuff on Tumblr and got more familiar with animated GIFs in different ways and started doing a lot of glitch stuff, and then wanted to try to do, I didn't know that it was rotoscoping. I just was like, you take footage and you trace over it and suddenly it like has texture to it, and a different sort of feel and vibe. And so I started doing that, and then I got some work from it, and I shifted over to focusing on that. What was the question? What's an animated film I like? The most recent animated film that I watched was Ponyo, and I enjoyed that one. I like that, just sort of like a magical-ish sort of deal. The one that I enjoyed before that, I can't remember the name of it, but it focuses on Irish folklore. It's on Netflix, or at least in the US it's on Netflix. That's something I have to remember working on stuff, is that, or talking to folks, is that not everyone has the same regional access to stuff. Song of the Sea that's what. Now I guess I'm on a folktale ish ocean life stuff, but Song of the Sea is about the folk tales around Silka or something like that, about people who turn into seals. But it's about that as a sort of folklore stuff. And that one was good. Growing up, I really liked 101 Dalmatians. I liked the dogs. I liked that it had a different sort of aesthetic to it, which part of the reasoning of that is the process by which Disney created works was shifted a bit at that time, where in order to save money, because it was more expensive. So before 101 Dalmatians, and at times afterwards, but the technical process of taking the pencil drawings, the animations, and transferring, I was going to say translating them, but transferring them to plastic sheets to cells, animation cells, required someone to come in and who was an artist themselves and trace over those animation lines frame by frame and transfer them onto cells, which was a slow process in and of itself and took highly skilled workers to do so, and it's therefore expensive. And with Xerox copying machines, that changed what was achievable. They could take the drawings, the pencil drawings, and directly transfer them via machine to plastic cells, and there might have to be a little bit of cleanup and stuff, but it made it so the line quality was a lot drier, if that makes sense, because it was taking it from the pencil markings and then upping the contrast and transferring it to the cells. And so it meant that the animation itself was a lot sort of harsher, had more edges and a little bit more textural elements to it. So that was one that I watched a lot growing up. What else? As far as animated films that are for more of an adult audience, I really liked when I was younger, and I haven't revisited it in some time, but Triplets of Belleville, which is a French movie, or the Belleville Triplets. I forget how it's actually phrased. But that one I enjoyed, and it sort of challenged me to watch a movie that was, the storyline was driven pretty much entirely visually. There's sound design and some songs that took place, but it's mostly by action. It's that sort of deal. The last animated one I saw in theaters, I really liked Enter the Spider-Verse. It's a more sort of chaotic and a lot more financially successful, but it's very dense. It's a weird balance of being like super dense in reference and storytelling and animation styles, but also being highly accessible, and you don't need to necessarily know all of these things in order to enjoy it, but it's all there, and that's a very difficult thing to accomplish. And saw I think it's The Red Turtle, I think is what the translation is into English. I enjoyed that one. That's another one that the storytelling is done without dialogue. And it's just an interesting storytelling and form of things. I also saw Your Name, which is a Japanese movie. I think The Red Turtle is a French movie. Most of the feature-length films that I know that are animated are American, French, or Japanese. And they have different aesthetics to them and storytelling elements. Let me turn this way. Then there's not super well versed in non-studio Ghibli, I think is how it's said. In non-studio Ghibli Japanese movies, I enjoyed. Only more recently watched the Ghost in the Shell movie, and those are ones that like are technically very impressive and do some interesting storytelling, but I tend to lean towards movies that have more playfulness to them, which that movie is more serious. It's got playful elements, but it's not like Ponyo or something. Hello. Call me Biegan. Maybe your name's Megan. And that's a play on that. Thank you, Andre. That's nice. I forget if I already said thank you. I went on a stream of consciousness, sort of talking. This one I decided to fill in the solids because it would be easier when it's more detailed work. And I was like, I'll do it digitally. But because this one is a little bit, it's a still, but it's softer. Oh, call me mate. I read it super weird. Call me maybe again. Makes more sense. I was reading it as like a play. I immediately thought it was a play on your name being Megan. There you go. Here's this guy, as is, a little bit chunkier in some bits, softer in others. And just out of my own want to do so, I'm going to just do a quick something or other on a piece of regular printer paper. This is just something of an illustration, or Joel, I'm not 100% sure what you're asking. This is just going to be a still image. Where do I buy my paper from? This right here, it's just like I bought like a big thing of copier paper or printer paper, standard paper. This is non-archival. Tracing paper I usually buy online. I've gotten it from places like Amazon and Blick. The current crop of paper that I have, I bought like 3,800 sheets of it, and then I cut it in half this actually is from, I bought a ream of 500 that is printer friendly. You can use it in an inkjet printer, which I've used it for that like once or twice, and it did okay. But I bought that on Amazon, and it's just tracing paper. What is the thing? What ink/brush do you use? It's very satisfying to watch. I use Sumi ink. SUMI is the kind of ink. I'm not 100% sure what qualifies something as Sumi ink, but I think it is made from vegetable soot, and it's a Japanese ink. The brand that I use is Yasutomo. I am familiar, or someone asked, have you ever seen Pingu? You're into watching it as a kid. I have seen Pingu because my dad in seminary spent a year in Bern in Switzerland, and Pingu is a Swiss character, if I'm not mistaken. He at least is popular in Switzerland. And so we visited Switzerland at one point when I was like 3. I don't remember that, but I did get a Pingu book I don't think I had a Pingu book at that time. I have it here. Somewhere I have a book that's a Pingu book. But I only knew it as that book, and also as when we went when I was like 3, we got ice cream at some place, and it came in a Pingu head. It was a plastic head, and it had his red nose on there. Or no, maybe, I forget. But, yeah, I'm familiar with Pingu, and then it's weird seeing, because that's my context for Pingu, is like these books and this ice cream that I had, and I'm like, it's a very specific, treasured Swiss thing that gets shown in different areas around Europe, and maybe other places, but now I see it in memes here and there, and like people fixate on the fact that he goes like newt newt. Chances are, if you're looking around and seeing memes, at least in the US, that at some point you've probably seen some Pingu. This will take a minute to fill, but I'm going to do it. It's only like 340. Cool. This is going to be a shorter live stream. Pingu is an example of non-French European animation, but it's a stop motion, which I am not as well versed in the histories of various countries in their stop motion. I know that there's some creepy stop motion that has come out of Russia. Just because when I've seen it, I'm like, oh, that kind of makes me a little bit uncomfortable. But it's older, and it's more likely that it was Soviet era. I painted the shirt that I'm wearing. This one's a little bit older and it has some stains on it, but those stains are out of frame. I stained this shirt while I was, ironically, staining some wood, and it's spattered. It's hard to see on the light, but there's a bunch of stuff. I just most of the time the shirts that I am wearing are ones that I've designed and have either painted, printed, or had printed. But this one is one that I painted. There's also other stains on here that aren't like from a wood stain. The older shirts that I have tend to have stains on. One of the reasons that I started painting on my own shirts was I had printed some shirts prior, but it's a lot of effort to prep a silkscreen for one shirt. It's sort of unnecessary. Oh, did you get your... Rosa just said hello. Hello, Rosa. I think your shirt was scheduled to arrive today. But while that's happening, one of the first times, or one of the first shirts that I was painting on was I had a terrible nosebleed at some point, and I was wearing just like a plain white shirt, and the shirt got some blood stain on it. Couldn't get rid of it, so I just painted over it. And I know which shirt has my hidden blood stains on it, but when people are watching it, they don't see the thing of it. Okay. What were you... Or you can ask whatever you'd like to, Rosa. Or if it's something you'd rather not share in a chat situation, you can direct message me or email me. I believe you... Yeah, you have my email. So whatever form you're most comfortable with. Yeah, I didn't leave that in there. Okay. Now it's scan time. Leaving me in suspense about whether or not you're gonna ask something. If you did get the shirt and okay, you're asking why I drew all the frames of the video on the computer and then transfer it over. So the initial plan was I was going to possibly just print out all of the photos of her and then animate around it. But when I did some testing on that, I wasn't following the music and I wasn't getting a good sense of motion that paired with the music. So I decided to sorry, let me just get this scanned. 600. This is Blackhead. The timing wasn't working well, and it wasn't pairing well with the Gracias, Hope Tib. It wasn't working well, but part of the full appeal of the whole thing was the quality of line that I get from painting with a brush and ink and the texture of the paper. And that isn't present digitally. I wanted it to be unique and reflect my aesthetic and process. and have a feel to it, which isn't super present in digital animation as much so. Uh, and so, easiest way to do that was to print everything out. Because initially, my thought process was rotoscope her lips, doing all the stuff because that's super timed to the visual of it, and then take those, print them out, and then trace the lips, and then do animation around it. But I did like a test of like 3 seconds of animation or something, and it wasn't good. Wasn't doing well, so I decided to just do it all digitally and then print it and transfer it. Uh, Thank you for the work, or for a compliment on the work and such. Let me just throw these back in frame so it's not empty, and then there's not too much work to be done on the digital front of this, so I'm just gonna do it and then show it to you guys. So, or I can even sort of illustrate it here, that the texture difference between having it on printer paper even, and one reason that I like the tracing paper. Let me make this smaller. One second. There's a lot of instances where people ask like why I work analog versus digital, and part of the reason is, well, I prefer it, but it's unique, and the fact that people are asking about it sort of highlights why, because it is a point of interest. Thank you for compliments on stuff. Little dance. That was when I did that. I wasn't planning necessarily on having it be public in any way. I want a JPEG, whatever. That was just me trying to get a grip on the pacing and movement, and what I was testing was like moving in a way that timed out to the music so I could look at that footage while I was animating, because the playback of music directly isn't great for Photoshop and where I was most comfortable working. This will be 4,400. Have a fade transition. Add files. And then the shirt that I was wearing is one that I printed myself. I have a couple of those still around. Okay, so it might not translate super well with the compression on the video, but here you can see a difference in texture. Even here, like tracing paper, I increased the darkness and the contrast a bit, so there's a greater contrast of the light and dark, but you can see a big difference in the amount of paper texture and physical warping of it, where this paper has some degree. Let me turn that off for a second. This paper has some degree of warping from the weight or from the moisture of the ink expanding it, but it's not nearly as exaggerated as the thinner tracing paper that has even less ink on it. So tracing paper really is expressive in that way, which can be bad if you don't want that, if you want like a perfectly flat sort of thing. But I like it, and it's something that is expressive and more chaotic. The darker the area is, the more solid ink that's there. You can't see that again. The more the paper is warped, because it expands the paper more in that area, and so if there's more ink in an area, it's trying to expand more, which means that the paper around it has to compensate by warping. And so if you have like a single dot, it's not super present in the area around it, but as you get it larger, the paper warps more and more, and you get more wrinkles. And you could try to fake it digitally. You could superimpose a texture on top of a digital animation, and a lot of people wouldn't necessarily pick up on the differences there. But anytime that I see a paper texture applied to a digital animation or animation that's done analog and then it's just an effect after the fact, usually the variance in the paper texture isn't that great for the time period. So like if you have 100 sheets of paper, they're all going to be different in some way. There's some amount of uniformity, but there's a difference in how the fibers are connecting and interlocking and such. And if you're trying to replicate that digitally, you would have to do that for every single frame, which just isn't practical. And so whenever you see effects that are applied to try and recreate things like film texture or something like that, especially if it's trying to push it further and there are elements of like scratches that are implied in the imitation of the film, they repeat pretty regularly unless you're playing it back or applying it digitally in some more chaotic form. But there's almost always going to be this repetitious nature to it that distracts me when I'm looking at stuff, and it's much more worthwhile for me in my practice of making things to actually just do the work, because the reward of having that effect being the actual thing is much greater than I want it to be what it is. I don't want it to be imitating the thing. It's the sort of thing to get that texture digitally of the analog. You can create it in a way that is, for most people, not perceptible that it's a digital thing, but part of it is that like no matter how good you're trying to imitate a physical item in a digital space, as time goes on, people's understanding of that imitation, people get more learned of the tricks and tools that are being used, and that aesthetic, that look becomes less and less realistic looking. And so if you look back in time at different effects or imitations that were created in a digital space, older movie effects, stuff like that, things that used to look very real now look very fake. But at the time, they were new, and there wasn't a reference. It wasn't a skill that was utilized often or a process that was utilized often. And so your familiarity and the general audience, viewing public's familiarity with those techniques was limited. And when it's faster and easier to replicate something, you start to see those same tools and those same tricks, those same actions used often and or pretty frequently, more and more, and audiences become smarter and more learned in that space, and they understand that this is fake, that this isn't real, and it becomes harder to fake that sort of real thing in a artificial space. And I prefer to create things analog, partly because it won't suffer from that same sort of fate of being outdated, where this sort of process is outdated in some ways, but it's also evergreen in others because it's ink on paper. It is what it is, and it's like pretty simplified and refined in that way. Let's see. What was it? Do I do in perspective? I'm not 100% sure what you're asking this time either. Are you asking, like, do I do things that have more three-dimensional elements to it? Because I typically don't. Getting a lot of texts. I'm in a group text with some friends, and I contribute sometimes, but there's a lot of conversation that happens without my interjection, which I enjoy reading, but it makes it seem like sometimes I've got a lot of text coming through, but it's just some folks talking outside of my interaction. If you're hearing the bzz bzz over the mic. And I'm not against working digitally. I just prefer analog, partly because of those reasons. I'm more comfortable with it, and I like seeing digital work that hello, Kira or Kiran. Thanks, Obstacle 12. I like seeing digital work that takes full advantage of what it is. Just in general, I like work that isn't seeking to fool an audience by like tricking them by trying to create something that isn't indicative of the process. There's a quote that I really like from Brian Eno about music and sound. I'm not going to remember it exactly, but the sentiment I remember, where he talks about how there's nostalgia for previous means of recording and listening to music, the things that people latch onto, that like the pops and crackles of records, the hiss of a cassette tape, the skipping of a CD, the thing that's the most defining element is the limitation of the medium, and that it's something of like the object or the medium, the means of listening to the music, it's elements of that medium being pushed to its limits, and that it's no longer able to control or confine or hold the energy and such that is trying to be conveyed. I'm messing up the quote a little bit, but I like being aware of those things that you try to avoid for means of recording or producing or sharing, recreating work and information. The things that you try to hide when it's the contemporary, when it's the most up-to-date, the most cutting edge sort of thing, the limitations that you're trying to hide when it's popular are the things that you pine for later on. And so I try to think about that with any sort of thing that I'm doing, where I want to know how it works, why it works, the processing of it, how the data is stored. I like learning about that because then I can use that to the best advantage possible, where I push it to its limit and I understand what its limitations are, ideally. And that's a much more comfortable space to be in with something as simplified as ink and paper. Because it's very broad what can be created with ink and paper, but it's not overwhelmingly broad for me, at least. Also, thank you. Or did you say? You caught me when I was just going on a rant, sort of thing. Not sure if your name is Kira, Karan, or something else entirely, but thank you for congratulating me on the Fiona Apple work. I appreciate it, and thanks for being patient as I talked more or less to myself to justify my process and such. You guys have any other questions? I was like, oh, I gotta show you, but I've had it playing here for a minute. Hey, Arteminiamus. I don't know if you just joined, but I'm not planning on being here for too much longer. Because I just was doing a still today. Because I am going to have dinner a little bit earlier and a little bit more structured. So I have a set time for dinner today. And then I'm watching a movie with my mom. Okay, your name is Karana. I was trying to decipher your name, and I was like, seems like it's a first name, last name that's squished together. And I was like, it's Kira Knob or something, or Knob, but it's Karana. Plan on watching a movie with my mom and sisters over the internet. You heard of it? And so that's we've been watching movies together for a minute now, typically on Saturdays. Hello, Rosie. Last week we watched, it's a mix. It's weird trying to figure out the best movies to watch as a group because we have like a side chat thing, and it can't be like a great dramatic work because then you're just watching it and you're not like doop doop boop type in together. But also it's sometimes frustrating to get a movie that everybody wants that's available for streaming, and the Indiana Jones. It's a quadrilogy nowadays. That one was a good one because there's a lot of like it's fun, adventurous sort of things. Hey, I'm not sure how to say your name. Millward. I'm just gonna try and say that. Or is it Leo? I don't have prices because it's pretty broad and I understand that it's frustrating. I find frustration trying to go and get a general idea of pricing of stuff. But if you're willing to email and contact, then I can work with you on stuff as far as being like Indiana Jones was fun. Unless you, I can't. Well, I can't read on this whether or not your name is like starting. I don't know if there are any names in Spanish that start with a double L, but I can't tell if it's two L's or if it's a capital I. If it's like Liam. Um. Oh, you're Indonesian for Karana. Beautiful moonlight. That's nice. Um. Sorry. So. Oh, you're. I think that I have some Welsh heritage. I'm pretty waspy in my heritage. Pretty Anglo-Saxon. What is it? What is wasps? White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Um, but if you email me, can discuss stuff. The Fiona Apple thing was something that I wanted to do. That they had a solid budget, and they were willing to accept the time that it took. Uh, because she works very slowly and is pretty solid. Oh, you're Celtic rather than Protestant. I'm not 100% sure. Sorry if I'm saying things all over the place. But I think that there is some Welsh history in my family. Also, some Dutch. I'm going all over the place. Movie, we're gonna probably watch the Michael Keaton Batman because it's the movies that work best for that sort of like group chat thing where it's my mom and sisters. It's hard finding the in between. But Indiana Jones brought some folks in. We also watched the Jurassic Park ones. We watched Song of the Sea, which I mentioned earlier, which is an animated one. Not all of it's consistently my mom and older sister. My younger sister, week by week, isn't joining up. Last week we watched She's the Man because I was looking for one that my sisters watched that a number of times when we were younger. It doesn't age super well, but it's decent with stuff. The week before that we watched Death Becomes Her, or no, Death Becomes Her, I think, because I've been listening to a podcast that goes through filmographies of directors, and went through they're going through Robert Zemeckis, and my brother-in-law was like, they did one about Death Becomes Her, and I didn't know anything about it, and it's a weird movie, but it's super big in drag culture, apparently. Death Becomes Her. And before that, we watched the newer Witches on HBO. Yep, with Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn and Bruce Willis in Death Becomes Her. The newer Witches, because the week before, my sister wanted to watch something sort of Halloweenish, and we watched the older Witches, which is a weirdly paced movie. The one with, what's her name? I forget, but the one from like early 90s, that Witches. What else have we watched? We watched Jurassic Park movies. We watched the Indiana Jones movies. It's a mix, but we've been doing it for a minute. But one thing that's nice about Batman is that there's a number of them. There are a few older ones, and then there's the Michael Keaton ones, and then I think Val Kilmer and George Clooney, which that one's super campy and whatever. Probably won't get to the Christopher Nolan ones because those aren't like as fun. I enjoy them, but they're not like a hey, this was jokey bloop bloop. That's how I watch Christopher Nolan movies. But my brother-in-law apparently like watched Death Becomes Her a lot growing up. and enjoyed it. But as far as like a theme for a movie, it's kind of chaotic and weird that Robert Zemeckis would have directed it. Oh yeah, Ben Affleck is in or was newest, but there's no standalone Ben Affleck movies, and those are less fun even than the Christopher Nolan ones. They're much more self-serious because that's the direction that DC has gone post Nolan and Dark Knight, where everything's like gritty-ish, except for Birds of Prey. That one was a lot more sort of fun about it. That was one of the last movies that I saw in theaters. Was Birds of Prey. The last one I think I actually saw was Singing in the Rain because it just so happened to be. There's an old theater nearby that, like every month will play old movies there, and they were doing, I forget what the theme was. They do like rescreenings of that, but Singing in the Rain, weird sequences that are like psychedelic almost in there, but it's a fun movie, and I understood why one of my friends who went like said that when he was younger he watched Singing in the Rain a lot and it made him want to be a dancer, and he's got that sort. He's not a dancer, but it made him want to be one because Gene Kelly is very charming in that movie. I have not watched Tenet. I don't think I've watched any movies that have been like a pandemic release. And there's not a drive-through. Favorite Paul Reiser role? It's gotta be himself in his 2-episode TV show. Actual probably favorite role is him in Aliens, just because I like that movie a lot. But he's not a likable person in that movie. When did that Paul Reiser show come out? I know it was when we were in college, but it's just weird. It's still weird. I don't think I can name any additional Paul Reiser roles offhand that are movies. It's Aliens, and that's about it. And he's a terrible person in Aliens. He's the corporate dude who's trying to bring back aliens in the body of Sigourney Weaver and her sort of adopted child. So he puts them in a room with face huggers in the hopes that they get impregnated with alien creatures and they can pass through quarantine and he can take them back to his corporation to use them for military purposes. Not a great dude in that movie. Any other questions? This is going to be funny for anybody who's watching this as a YouTube later and they're like, oh, this one looks like it's the illustration one and it's an hour and a half. Maybe he's got like a more detailed illustration. No, talking about Paul Reiser. I can't let this turn into talking on the phone. What was it? You recommend something else for me and my mom to watch? Season 3, episode 6 of The Crown on Netflix. I watched like 1 or 2 episodes of the first season passively. We haven't gotten into any TV shows. I think a movie is like the right length. I've watched some shows with just my sister, and there's a different sort of understanding of how much time commitment we're doing into it. And shows are such that you can be like, we'll just watch 1 more or 2 more or 3 more. But your father's relationship with Prince Charles, I can check into it. If you do want to try and see, I can try to work with you and your budget to create something that you're happy with, depending on what the application where like Fiona's the work has been the first where they have a significant enough budget for me to justify putting in the work to create entirely original animation. Sorry about not responding before, Karana. Uh, Depending on what it is, I haven't done so much collaboration work except with people that I know personally and have some existing sort of relationship prior to working together, just because I have some frustrations in the past with working with people offhandedly, um, just because we don't have a mutual understanding of work process and stuff like that. So I tend to have more success when I do collaborations with people that I've sort of talked with or something before, and have seen them or worked with them in some loose capacity. That is something else, but there's a possibility of working together. Leo Banana. Hopefully that's what you're going for. Advice for artists. Enjoy it. I don't know. If you're trying to network, that's important. I'm not great at it. If you have some sort of work or you meet up with someone and you enjoy it, following up with them is a very good thing to do, because I haven't done that a lot of times, but when I have done it, it's really good for creating a relationship with other folks and just having just a nice, like, hey, great to meet you, blah blah blah, and then you can point them to something, and if that ruins that relationship, then it probably wouldn't have been good otherwise. But it's just a nice thing to follow up, and then reminder, because a lot of the time at networking events or stuff like that, there's usually a lot of people being introduced to each other, and it's easy to forget folks. Back to the person who was talking about commissioning or something. If you want to email me, that's the easiest way to make contact and establish a talking back and forth. You can also DM me, but email works better for me. That's where I like to keep things once they expand a little bit larger, or if they're more of a professional situation sort of thing, or more ambitious potential. Just DMs feel more like a quick little thing. I like having a record of stuff that's easier to access from multiple locations, and email is better for that. And my email is traceloops@traceloops.com. You can also click that in my bio, I'm pretty sure. Click email, but it's just traceloops@traceloops.com. And that's the best way to reach out to me about possibly working on something. And what else? There's my email. Just went through that. Watch Paranormal series. Maybe. I don't know. We just sort of go here and there. What other advice for artists? If you can have some sort of hook, that's memorable, it's helpful. Something where people can say, like, blah blah blah, or like, this person, and you're like, who's that? And then they can be like, it's the guy who does this. If you can have that sort of quick, easy to describe work that can be distilled. It can be frustrating to think about yourself being pigeonholed and being refined to just that sort of thing, but if you think about like your favorite artists, musicians, performers, stuff like that, usually you're able to take their breadth of work and be like, they're the ones who do this. And it can be frustrating to have to admit that to yourself, which I've gone through that as, like, I don't want to be defined as anything, but if you can quickly communicate what it is that defines you, it's helpful for folks and makes things a little bit easier for people who might not be as well versed in your work, or people who aren't as entrenched in your specific focus where you feel that you have a lot of variation and nuance to things. But it could be someone who's like a copy editor who just needs someone and they're looking quickly through things, or they're asking for recommendations and someone's like, oh, here's this person, meaning you, the artist, they are blah, 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 blah. They do blah, 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 blah. And quick, easy to convey that. That's helpful if you're looking for work and you're trying to communicate your ideas to the largest number of people that could hire you for things that might not be experts in your specific focus. What was I gave the email. How long do I spend working on the animations? Depends a lot on the animation. It's a pretty broad thing, like how much time for a painting, how much time for a drawing. It varies depending on the complexity and how familiar I am with the process that I'm using. Usually, if I'm doing a live stream, I'm trying to do an animation that's moderate in length for me, which means like up to maybe 60 frames, unless it's purely abstract. If it's purely abstract, then I can go like 100 frames within a couple hours, and then the scanning just takes a while. But for live streams, it usually is like 3 to 5 hours, and that's for a few seconds of animation that I'm decently versed in and have a familiarity. What is Garlic Fool said, you are the best, follow you for years. Thank you, appreciate it. It's weird to say, or not weird, but it's interesting to me to see how long people have been following me on different platforms and whether or not they've sort of transitioned one to the other. And some people, it's like, I just found you this week because blah, 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 blah. Thing happened there. That's another thing, advice. Make stuff accessible if you can, because you never know how someone will discover your work. There's a lot of people who... There's a lot of work that is... or people who are found by luck. And you can argue that it's purely luck, but depending on who the person is, it might be that they got lucky because they made it accessible. You have to... It's like entering into a lottery. Like if you enter into a raffle and you only buy one ticket, you have to be very lucky to have that one ticket drawn. But if you enter in a raffle and you put in 2 tickets, 2 opportunities, 2 ways of people to find your work, then now you have 2 sources of possibly being drawn, picked out. The more accessible and you make your work, that doesn't necessarily mean like just post stuff constantly everywhere always, but just making things accessible is helpful in being found by a variety of people. Like, what was it? I always think about the fact that Justin Bieber was discovered by Usher because he just happened to find his video on YouTube. So that's an opportunity that was to be discovered, put out there, and luck of the draw. And that's how he came to be a teenage heartthrob and millionaire. That's a weird guy. But it's a mixture of luck and hard work for producing things. What's my opinion on going to art school? Is it needed? Less so than it used to be, as most school higher learning things are, because people aren't as focused on having degrees, and the cost of degrees has gone up significantly in recent years. But I learned a lot when I went to art school, and I ended up shifting what my focus was. And so, like, I do use skills that I learned at school, a number of which I wouldn't have or have had necessarily the same experiences, or opportunities to explore additional forms of work had I not been at a place that had those readily available. I did not use all of the opportunities at school that were given to me. Um, art school is good for networking, learning some things, and experiences. I had some little bits of networking. I can point to it as a thing where it's a means of defining people sometimes, where if you're like, oh, you went to RISD, then you have an idea of what sort of person goes to RISD, and those descriptions can be helpful or hurtful depending on how you're using them and where you're using them. But more of what I got from it was a culture of like-minded people exploring spaces, most of which were people outside of my major. Most of my friendships came from, pretty much all my friendships came from doing college radio. And so it's a specific niche of people who are interested in college radio sort of music that are at art school and have these different things going about that way. And so there are opportunities there. Not too much of my opportunities as an animator have come directly from going to art school, but I learned various things in that larger community of like-minded folks. Depends on your art school too. So I'll say, I can't say yes or no. I can say that I know people who went to art school who are very successful and people who aren't. And I know people who didn't go to art school who are very successful and people who aren't. And it's something to be aware of your financial ability to go. It's more difficult when you're younger to not follow the same timeline as your peers. That's something that's hard to forego, and I did not do it. I wasn't comfortable with it, but looking back, it's something that I could be like, you're allowed to not follow. You immediately go and follow this year by year by year by year. You can come back and go back because pretty much every degree, it's not a requirement that within this time period you take this number of classes and do this and that. So depends on what your trajectory is. There's a lot of things, but I would say I wish that I was like more comfortable with taking advantage of the density of what I had as opportunity at that time, working a little bit harder maybe, but also not. I don't know. I like what I ended up with. There's things, so you look back, any experiences that you have that you can say, I wish I had done this or not done that, and really if you were to have done that, you probably would have regretted the things that you didn't do. Glad that you found Sam Cannon on stuff. There's a suggestion for advice on getting your work out there, making it accessible, posting it on different things, reaching out or trying to establish yourself within a community somehow. How I met Sam was through part of the duo Mr. GIF. And I met them because I liked their work on Tumblr, and I had some more work getting featured at times when Tumblr had a GIF, like a curated GIF section. They're curated tags, and I would, if anything ever got featured there, I would look at who had recently liked it right before it got featured, and then I'd send them a message like, hey, thanks for featuring this, I appreciate, or like, hey, did you feature this, I appreciate it, because there was a list of editors for that tag, and so I made connections there, and Mr. GIF was one of those things, and I was like, oh, I'll be around. So I met them when I visited New York at some point in time, and worked with them in different capacities over time, and they were a little bit more proactive in finding collaborators of people's work that they liked, and they knew Sam from doing that sort of work, and Sam was in town. It was I met her on Halloween because I remember the streets in Manhattan were closed off for Halloween stuff, and met her, talked with her. She was in town because uh, she was going to some like camera convention ish thing with some other people from her school because she majored in photography, and so they were in town and met up, and then I got to know her better because uh, she and I were offered to go to Fashion Week stuff for Tumblr when that was a little bit more active, and she was still in school at the time and didn't. I would have had money for it, but I offered for her to stay with me because I live at a spot that had a spare bedroom, and it. I'd only met her like briefly before that, but she stayed here, and we worked on stuff for Fashion Week going through there, and then continued, and then she moved to New York following that, and just have kept up that friendship. Uh, and we have lunch weekly. Maybe she doesn't join up every time, but with a different friend. But I enjoyed reading her post about the Fiona video. Your major was fashion design. I know a lot of people who burnt out a little bit in fashion. I went to SCAD in Atlanta. A lot of people who burn out in fashion design because it's people who have their own personal interest in fashion, but it's a harsh business because a lot of it is sort of seasonal, cultural, and not entirely subjective, but people who love clothing and fashion and exploring that. But then the reality of networking, and it can be a little bit saturated with people who have similar interest. It can be difficult for folks to make headway in that space. Yeah, this is like 30 minutes of just talking. Thanks for people who are watching. It's 4:30. I can talk more. I don't have anything specifically I'm talking about. Any questions, comments, concerns, or such? My hair's getting longer, which I don't ever see it because I always just sort of brush it back. I buzz my head. In the process video for the Shamika video, you can see my hair being different lengths, which is funny to me, getting a mustache and stuff. Any tips to get international jobs or tips to get international relatives, relationships? I haven't gotten that many international jobs, and I don't know how to approach getting relationships if you're looking for work from US based things. Again, being accessible, reaching out to some people here and there. Ideally, people who have some sort of interaction with your work already. Something I saw recently was on TikTok, and it was someone suggesting something that Gary V dude says to do, but it made sense to me, is searching on relevant tags or seeing people who are popular in your interests and going and commenting on their posts, because that puts you ahead of stuff, just like nice things or stuff, or maybe insightful bits as comments, because even for myself, I get whatever likes on posts, but when people comment, I'm more interested in seeing what they say because there's a little bit more to it. Something that's like, I enjoy this element of this work. It's a weird balance to like try and establish a relationship with someone, but not alienate them immediately by being too forward with things. Uh, Being kind, courteous, considering if you were on the other side, what you would appreciate, um, and formatting stuff for uh, responding to things with that in mind, not just being too aggressive, but sometimes being super aggressive works too. This is my perspective and experience with things, but it's not a perfect system, and ideally you find your own thing. Take any of my comment or suggestions purely as suggestions. Don't take them as being the absolute truth or anything like that, because it's just my thing. Use it, adopt it, but don't treat it as sacred text or something like that. I wouldn't want anyone to do that, and don't like doing that myself. Any questions or such? I got 15 people at this point when I'm not. Well, I guess it's more engaging when I'm talking than when I'm working. Trying to think any other tips or suggestions. Have confidence in your work, which is something that's hard to do. Mentioned it at some point before, but Ira Glass talks about that you have to sort of have some blind confidence or some unjustified confidence in your own work. Speak like your professor. Cool. That makes me feel young and hip. Confidence in your work. Ira Glass talks about looking back on work when he first started doing it. He's a host of This American Life, looking back on work that he did a while ago and thinking it's just bad, but at the time thinking it's amazing. And I recently looked at stuff that I made in like middle and high school, and at the time I'm like, this is amazing. I don't see why this isn't like the best thing that everyone's talking about. And within my community of fellow students and such, there was a bit of like, that's very good or that's good. But in my mind, it was like internationally acclaimed is how good it should have been perceived. Like no one's done this or thought of this before. And having that that confidence is helpful in continuing to be motivated moving forward. It's a weird balance. It's all weird balance stuff. What's the other bit here? Speaking like your professors. What was the other thing? Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, probably take whatever advice I give with a grain of salt and shift it to your own. Also, I know that from personal experience, any advice that I'm given, I may or may not take depending on whether or not I like it in that moment in time. So if you completely ignore me, totally cool with that, because there's a lot of stuff that you just have to learn on your own, regardless of like how good advice is or how bad it is. You take the advice that you want to, and you can look back and be like, oh, that was a bad choice that I made there. But at the time, you're like, this is definitely the best choice. I'm staying here for Thanksgiving stuff. I'll probably do a shorter stream if I do a stream. That's coming up, Thanksgiving. I do live streams daily, typically, unless there's something else coming up. I didn't do it. Was that last week? Yeah. Not this week, but the previous week. I was busy with other stuff, so I didn't do live streams. And then I had skipped a few days when I was both experiencing food poisoning and recovering from, and then doing some work that I would have done while I was sick. I was condensing that time. But I do live streams pretty good. Oh, here's my spiel time. So if you want to get a shirt or something like that, these designs will be up shortly on some shirts that you can buy. You can go to traceloops.com/store. If you are not based in the US, prices will be a little bit more depending on where you are. But email me, traceloops@traceloops.com, and I can work with you to see if the increase in price is something that you're comfortable with, and then figure out how best to execute those things. That's traceloops.com/store. And then if you want to watch more YouTube or watch these live streams, because you were saying you like looking at the live stream and it feels personal, I have a bunch of live streams up on YouTube, and those, if you search TraceLoops, you can find a bunch of these videos that are just these streams without the comments section scrolling through, because I'm recording the output, not the live stream itself, or the Instagram live stream itself. You're not seeing those, but YouTube, and search TraceLoops. If you have a TikTok and want to follow me there, you can follow me over there, and it is the same username, TraceLoops. That one, it's the same content. It's just no still images. Hello. I don't recognize. Believe. Oh, is that the Welsh flag? Oh, the shirt just arrived. I thought it said that it was set to arrive on Saturday. Glad it arrived. Hopefully the fit of it is good, since you looked at the actual cut and such. Yeah, I live stream pretty consistently here on Instagram, 3 p.m. EDT, New York time, East Coast time. I was on time today. Sometimes I'm a little bit late. And yeah, if you have questions and you don't have enough time to type them in before I head out from here, you got it. I'm glad that you enjoy the shirt. But if run out of time and you don't feel like emailing me, you can direct message me. And I try to respond to those relatively quickly. Email is traceloops@traceloops.com. If there are any questions, throw them my way. Try to get back to you. I can't guarantee that I will, just because I'm a person. Sometimes I forget. But I do my best. So yeah, thank you all for watching. That was a lot more talking than I anticipated. Give you guys maybe a sec to throw that last bit of question if you got them. Otherwise, I'll head out and make these two shirts available as designs on the internet. I'm also probably going to update the shirt that's on there, which is a shirt of me wearing 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 a shirt. I forget how far it goes. Thank you. I've been staying home pretty consistently. And I've been tested intermittently and gotten all negatives for COVID tests. And I walk wherever I walk. But yeah, numbers are getting higher. So yeah, trying to stay safe on stuff. All right, and you guys stay safe as well. Glad that you loved your tea, and that you're wearing it. It shouldn't fade bad at all, and it might fade a little bit. Thanks for watching, Dylan. Didn't realize you stuck around as long as you were. Probably play some of that Game Boy Micro you gave me in a bit. I'm trying to get through all the gyms and Pokemon. Okay, gonna do this nice subtle wave. Say goodbye. Thank you all for watching. Gonna head out. Adios. Gonna stop the recording.